Good evening. Welcome to our study of Daniel chapter 8 for Wednesday night, Adult Bible Study. We are looking at the book of Daniel and have been for several weeks now. Daniel was taken captive to Babylon at the age of 12 and was serving in the court of Nebuchadnezzar by age 15. So chapter 1 pretty much gives his history. And that's part 1 of Daniel. Then Daniel's divided into two other parts, part 2 and part 3. Part 2 is written in Chaldean, which would be the Gentiles or folks other than the Jews. Chapters 8 through 12 are written in Hebrew and were written about the children of Israel. So in chapters 2 through 7 we have the prophetic plan for the Gentiles. And it's interesting that Daniel has been able to paint the picture from the first major world power, which was Babylon, all the way to the last world power that will be defeated, which is the Antichrist. So it's amazing that God in this little book has painted all of human history. And we see from Babylon all the way to the Antichrist. It's amazing that God would reveal this to Daniel. Daniel would record it, and it's available for us to read and study and look at today. Many of the events that Daniel saw, the dreams that he interpreted of the kings, and the activities that we have looked at so far pointed to the nations that would rise and fall of the Gentile race, which was everybody non-Jewish, and how they would play out. How that God gave them their throne, gave them their supremacy, gave them their power, and then they were then given the opportunity to rule, and most of them ended in failure. Because when mankind is elevated to a position of authority, he tends to rebel against God, sees himself as God, and then questions God's authority. And God brings their demise. So we've seen this play out time and time again in world history. And I think it's interesting as we look at the book of Daniel. I think if our school systems really did justice to our children, they would include the book of Daniel in world history. Because Daniel saw world history events before they took place. Now that's part of the argument against the book of Daniel, is that it had to have been written later on because it so accurately predicted the future. But that's what true prophecy is. True prophecy is God's revelation to mankind, the human race, of what the plan is and where it's going to lead. And all we have to do is follow it and listen to it and trust God, and He will see us through to the end. So tonight we're picking up in chapter 8. This is the first chapter written in Hebrew to the children of Israel. And this kind of connects to chapter 7. Because chapter 7, Daniel had dreamed of 4 beasts. And if we jump back to Daniel chapter 7, we have the 4 beasts that Daniel saw. He saw a lion with outstretched wings, a bear with ribs in its mouth, a leopard with 4 wings and 4 heads, and then he saw a dragon, seemingly more powerful than all the others, able to crush and stamp with its feet, with tall horns. And so as we look at these are the kingdoms of the world up until today. The lion with the outstretched wings, of course, was Babylon. The bear with the ribs was the Medo-Persian Empire that followed the Babylonian Empire. And then we had the leopard, which was Alexander the Great. The 4 wings that shows how he swiftly swept across the Medo-Persian Empire to conquer the known world of his day. And the 4 heads of that leopard, after Alexander the Great died prematurely in battle, not from battle but from a sickness, he died, passed away. 4 of his generals split the kingdom into 4 different kingdoms. We're going to see that in tonight's lesson. So the 4 heads of the leopard. Then that gave way to the dragon with 10 horns, very symbolic of the Roman Empire, as Rome came into power. And since the Roman Empire, there has not been a world power. I want you to think about that. Since the Roman Empire, the time of Jesus Christ, there has not been a world power. There's been multiple countries that are powerful and are superpowers, but there has not been one world leader. Now, Hitler, Mussolini, some of these people tried, but they have not accomplished another world power. Up out of that Roman Empire, that little horn in chapter 7 rises up with eyes and a mouth, going about to conquer and rule. So we will see a world power rise out of that old Roman Empire, and it will take over the known world democratically, not by power and might, but by invitation of the people. And we see the stage being set for that one world government now. So these are the 4 powers that have been in our day, but in Daniel's day they had not yet existed. So all of this was written in advance of these nations actually existing. So that's the amazing, awesome power of Almighty God to reveal to Daniel all of these things in advance of them happening. So tonight we're going to jump into chapter 8. Daniel dreams another dream. The first dream that Daniel had in chapter 7, he had in the first year of Belshazzar, which was the son or grandson of Nebuchadnezzar. This would have been before Daniel in the lion's den. Okay, so if you're getting this in your head, this occurred before Daniel was thrown in the lion's den. He had these 2 dreams. In verse 7, he couldn't interpret the dream. A bystander interpreted it for him from within the dream. Tonight in the lesson, Gabriel, the angel Gabriel, is actually going to give Daniel the interpretation of the dream. So in Daniel chapter 8, if you want to open your Bibles, read along with us, starting in verse 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared unto me, even unto me Daniel, after that which appeared unto me at the first. So he had another dream. The first one, chapter 7, he had in the 1st year of Belshazzar. This one he's having now in the 3rd year of Belshazzar. And I saw in a vision, and it came to pass when I saw that I was at Shushan in the palace, which is in the province of Elam. And I saw in a vision, and I was by the river of Ulai. Then I lifted up mine eyes and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram which had 2 horns, and the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last. So Daniel's on the banks of the river in Babylon. He sees a ram with 2 horns, one horn higher than the other, and it's standing on the bank of the river. Verse 4, and I saw the ram pushing westward and northward and southward, so that no beast might stand before him. Neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand, but he did according to his will, and became great. So Daniel saw this ram pushing north and south and west, conquering as it went. Nothing could stand before it. It was very powerful. In verse 5, and as I was considering, behold, a he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth, and touched not the ground, and the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. So now Daniel sees a he-goat, a male goat, as it comes from the west, and it is coming toward the ram. It's in the air, not on the ground, so as in attack mode, charging in, and has leaped toward the ram. So it's coming quickly, it's coming powerfully, and so in this picture you see the ram poised with its horns and head down, and the he-goat attacking from the west, coming through the air. and it has a notable horn in its head, a very strong horn. In verse 6, and he came to the ram that had two horns, which I had seen standing before the river, and ran unto him in the fury of his power. So this goat charges into the ram and hits the ram in the fury of his power. And I want you to understand, Daniel is seeing this under the reign of Belshazzar before the conquest, before Belshazzar's death. Okay, so Daniel is seeing these dreams in advance of these countries even existing against him, and smote the ram and brake his two horns. And there was no power in the ram to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground and stamped upon him, and there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. Therefore the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and for it came up four notable ones toward the four winds of heaven. So this he-goat charges into the ram with this horn. I envision stabbing and killing the ram and stamping upon him, and waxing very great, being very powerful, very strong. But somehow this long, strong horn is broken. And what comes up under this broken horn is four additional horns in each direction. And it says toward the four winds of heaven. So we have an image here. Daniel on the banks of a river. He sees a ram with two horns, very powerful, very strong, conquering. And then a he-goat charges in midair, coming quickly and fast and attacking the ram and totally destroying it. And in the process, that horn is broken. And not so much in the process of destroying the ram, but in the process of time, that horn is broken. And what comes up beyond that horn is four additional horns. Now, I want to go back and I want you to look at this leopard. This leopard has four heads and it has four wings. The four wings symbolize swiftness. The four heads symbolize a division. Okay, so as we come back to chapter 8, we have seen this image of the goat and the ram. Now let's go a little further. Look at verse 9. And out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great toward the south, and toward the east, and toward the pleasant land. And it waxed great even to the host of heaven. And it cast down some of the host and of the stars to the ground, and stamped upon them. Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host. And by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. And a host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression. And it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and prospered. Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint which spake, How long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice, and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden under foot? And he said unto me, Unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. Now, something has happened here in verses 9 through 14. We saw the big horn, and the big horn was broken. After the big horn was broken, four additional horns emerged. Now, out of these four horns emerged yet another smaller horn out of one of the horns. So you have one divided into four, and then one of the four sprouts another. Okay, I want you to get that image in your head of what's going on in Daniel's dream. We're going to get some interpretation here in a moment, but see the horns, see the division, and then add a fifth horn, not out of the base, but out of one of the horns. And then we have a time period, a prophecy that the daily sacrifice would cease. Well, in the temple in Jerusalem, there were 2 daily sacrifices. And so these sacrifices were given ongoing, perpetually, from the time of Moses and Aaron all the way up until this particular point in time, until the Babylonian captivity, at any rate. So we see this situation where the sacrifices are taking place. Well, this horn is given authority to stop the sacrifice in the temple. He's given authority to inflict pain upon the Jewish nation and the Jewish people. So let's think about this 2,300 days. It's basically 6.3 years. There's a couple of interpretations that I want to point out. One interpretation takes that the 2,300 evenings, mornings, referred to 2,300 total units or days. This would put the persecution of Antiochus from September 6, 171 BC, to December 164 BC, about 6 1/3 years. All right, now, Antiochus, this brings up a name. This little horn, there was a king that came up out of one of these 4 horns. A Seleucid king came up out of the Persian Empire area. This king was brutal. He was the worst of the worst, and he inflicted much hardship on the children of Israel. He reigned from the time the persecution began until he was stopped, was about 6 1/3 years. So this 2,300 days could have referred to his reign and the time that he inflicted pain upon Jerusalem and the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Then there's another interpretation that takes that there were only 1,150 days. In other words, you take 2,300 divided by 2, because there were 2 sacrifices every day, and that would be 1,150 actual days. That adds up to 1,150 evening and 1,150 morning sacrifices that would not be offered. This would put the calendar date starting in December 167 BC, the desecration of the temple, to the rededication of the temple under Judas Maccabees on December 164 BC. So during Antiochus' reign, he desecrated the temple. From the time he desecrated the temple until the time that the Maccabees revolted against the Seleucids and the Herodians and retook the temple and restarted the worship of God, was this 1,150 days. So that could be the time that is talked about here. Okay? After Antiochus' death, the Jews celebrated the cleansing of their holy place with the Feast of Lights, which was Hanukkah, in celebration of the restoration led by Judas Maccabees. This feast was even celebrated by Jesus in John chapter 10, verses 22 to 23. So the Feast of Lights, Hanukkah, was celebrated by Jesus Christ, which means this event had already occurred prior to Jesus' reign and Jesus' time here. That becomes important because Jesus refers to a situation where a leader comes into the temple, desecrates the temple, and establishes himself as God. But Jesus refers to it in Matthew chapter 24 as a future event. Okay? Now that's very important, because in Daniel it's referred to as a future event, but in Jesus' time it had already occurred. Then Jesus compares what occurred in Daniel to a future event that is yet to come, which we tend to believe is the Antichrist. So we have a leader that fits the description of verses 9 through 14. His name is Antiochus Epiphanes. and he was a Seleucid king, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. He desecrated the temple in Jerusalem. He established a statue of himself, declared himself to be Zeus, the Greek god, and he sacrificed a pig on the altar and spilled its blood, which desecrated God's altar. Pigs were unclean and could not be used for sacrifice. So we have a person that fits this description perfectly. And the time of it also fits this description perfectly. So we want to look at that. Now in verse 15, and it came to pass when I, even I, Daniel, had seen the vision and sought for the meaning, then behold, there stood before me as the appearance of a man. And I heard a man's voice between the banks of Ulai, which called and said, Gabriel, make this man to understand the vision. This is where the angel Gabriel comes in to help Daniel understand what he has seen. So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was afraid and fell upon my face. But he said unto me, Understand, O son of man, for at the time of the end shall be the vision. So in other words, he's telling Daniel this vision pertains to the end. Now as he was speaking with me, I was in a deep sleep on my face toward the ground. But he touched me and set me upright. So he stood Daniel up. And he said, Behold, I will make thee know what shall be in the last end of the indignation. For at the time appointed the end shall be. So this is pointing toward a future time when the end is to occur. The ram which thou sawest, having two horns, are the kings of the Medes and Persians. So the ram that we saw with the two horns was the Medo-Persian Empire. Now, if you go back to Nebuchadnezzar's dream of the golden statue, Babylon was the golden head. The arms crossed was the Medes and the Persians, because they would join together. They were of silver. And then of bronze, there was a kingdom that would come after them. And that kingdom, in verse 21, and the rough goat is the king of Grecia. And the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king, Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great was a Greek. He charged across the Mesopotamia area and into Persia, conquering the Medes and the Persians. And he did it swiftly over a period of about 10 years. Verse 22, now that being broken, this first king being broken, whereas four stood up for it. 4 kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation, but not in his power. So after Alexander the Great, the Greek kingdom split into 4 kingdoms. And so I want to kind of go down and talk about that, and then we'll come back to verse 23. So Alexander the Great had 4 successors. Okay, Ptolemy I, which went into Egypt and the Levant, Syria, Lebanon, Israel, and Palestine. This was Ptolemy I. The Ptolemies controlled this area. That was part of the Greek Empire, but his general Ptolemy I divided off. So this is the darker green in the picture. Then the Seleucids, Seleucus I Nicator, took Mesopotamia and Iran, this lighter green color. That was basically the Medo-Persian Empire. So it was taken by this Seleucid king, Seleucus I Nicator. Then Cassander took Greece. That's the fuchsia color, pink over here to the left. Greece and Macedonia. That was taken by Cassander. And then the brownish color, orangish brown color here, was Lysimachus, and that was Thrace, Asia Minor, parts of Turkey, the place where the 7 churches in the book of Revelations are from. So this was Lysimachus, took this area. So there's 4 parts of Alexander the Great's kingdom as it divided. Now, coming up out of this light green area is Antiochus Epiphanes. Now, Antiochus Epiphanes Who was he? Antiochus IV, a king of the Seleucid Empire, took upon himself the title Epiphanes, meaning the illustrious one or God manifest. He was known as Antiochus Epiphanes and reigned from 175 BC until 164 BC in what is now Syria. He nearly conquered Egypt and was known for severe persecution of Jews. This oppression led to the Maccabean revolt. Jews nicknamed him Epiphanes, meaning mad one. Epiphanes, not Epiphanies. Epiphanes, mad one. He was crazy. He was power hungry. He tried to conquer, tried to destroy the Jews. The Maccabean conflict began when some of the Jews, the Hellenists, integrated Greek culture and pagan practices into their communities. Now, this guy was a Greek, so the Hellenists were the Greek influence within the Jewish culture. Christ is going to deal with these Hellenist Jews, and there's some issues that he's going to have with them. The disciples are going to have problems with them. They had merged the Greek culture into the Hebrew culture, and God was not pleased with this. This was not a good thing. So this Antiochus Epiphanes was a threat to the Jewish religion. The traditionalist Jews continued to follow the Mosaic law and customs. When civil war between the two Jewish factions seemed imminent, Antiochus ordered all Jews to worship Zeus and made practicing Jewish rites and worshiping Yahweh illegal in an effort to extinguish Jewish culture. So the Jews were fighting each other. These Hellenistic Jews were fighting the traditional Jews. Antiochus Epiphanes saw this as an opportunity to sweep in and just wipe out Jews altogether. So he was going to just get rid of them. The Jews rebelled. Antiochus attacked Jerusalem, stealing items from the temple and setting up an altar to Zeus. He went so far as to sacrifice a swine, a pig, to Zeus, which caused a backlash from the Jews. The Jews were furious. Antiochus then had many Jews killed and others sold into slavery. He outlawed circumcision, making it a capital offense, and ordered Jews to sacrifice to pagan gods and eat pork. So he was horrible. He also, in erecting this altar or this statue to Zeus, it was a statue of himself. And then he called himself Zeus in the flesh. So he declared himself to be God in the temple of God and sacrificed a pig to himself. Judas Maccabeus was one of these traditionalist Jews. His father Matthias actually moved his family into exile during this period of time because they refused to worship this fella, Antiochus Epiphanes, and they refused to bow down to his statues and the desecration that he did within the temple. They opposed that, so his son Judas Maccabeus led a rebellion. And battle after battle, they won and began to move things forward. After he won, he renovated the Temple of Jerusalem, rededicated it, purified it, and began to restart the practice of serving God in the sacrifice within the temple. This event is referred to as Hanukkah, and the Jews still celebrate Hanukkah today. So it's of importance that you look back at Jewish history, that you become familiar with Antiochus Epiphanes and this desecration of the temple that he did, so that you can better understand the role the Antichrist is going to play in the future, because Antiochus Epiphanes is a foreshadowing of the Antichrist and what the Antichrist will do. And Jesus actually refers to parts of this text in Matthew chapter 24 and in some other places. Now, there was also an interesting situation about this guy that I want to bring up. In Syria, Olympian Zeus was identified with a god they called Baal Shaman. Now, these Hellenistic folks came in with Alexander the Great from Greece. They came into the Medo-Persian Empire, Syria, and they brought their gods, Zeus, who was the Greek pantheon, top god. Well, they merged him into the Syrian culture. Well, in Syria, he was referred to as Baal Shaman, meaning the Lord of Heaven. So in Jerusalem, Zeus was worshipped with the equivalent Hebrew name Baal Shemayim. Okay, the children of Israel had difficulty with Baal worship the whole time, all throughout their history, and God was always furious about this Baal worship. So they called this Zeus in Hebrew Baal Shemayim. Okay, some extreme Hellenizing Jews probably considered Zeus or Baal Shemayim as the same as Yahweh, the Lord of Heaven. All right, so they considered, some of these Hellenistic Jews considered Baal Shemayim as God, but he wasn't. It was Zeus, the Greek god. Okay, I want you to get that in your head. Pious Jews refused to say the word Baal. So said Shikus, Shiqqus, meaning abomination in its place. So instead of saying Baal, they would say Shikus, because it was abomination. They would not say Baal. They would not even give him the luxury of being named, because he was a false god. So they would say Shiqqus, meaning abomination, in this place, in its place. So they would use Shiqqus instead of Baal. So among Jews, Baal Shemayim became Shiqqus Shomim, translated into English as the abomination of desolation, or the desolating sacrilege. So this phrase, the abomination of desolation, translated from Shiqqus Shomim, actually was talking about this Antiochus Epiphanes, establishing Zeus as the primary god in Israel. And the devout Jews resisted that. So I want you to study the abomination of desolation wording more as it relates to what Jesus was talking about in Matthew chapter 24 and what Daniel's talking about here in chapter 8. So it's an interesting little find there, and I hope you get your whistle wet and you want to jump into that a little bit more and study that out. So this Antiochus Epiphanes is a precursor to the Antichrist that will arise in the end times. So we need to understand that and study a little bit about him. Now, let's go back to verse 23, chapter 8. And in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up, and his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. And he shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper in practice, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. And through his policy also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand. And he shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many. He shall also stand up against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without hand. Now, one thing about Antiochus Epiphanes, he was able to destroy, and he used his religion, the Hellenistic religion, and the Greek pantheon, Greek culture, to try to control the Mesopotamian Persian area. It was a large area with a lot of people, a lot of different cultures. And so he used the Greek culture to try to unify all of these people, and the Greek religion to try to unify all of these people. So he had a peaceful political agenda to bring all of these people under his wing, under his culture, and then control them. But it says here that he shall be broken without hand. He won't be defeated by an earthly force. Epiphanes was not defeated by an earthly force. As he had caused a lot of trauma in Jerusalem, he was off on the battlefield, attacking another area, or planning to attack and bring about his mischief. Apparently had some kind of fall and injury, and then more than likely developed gangrene, sepsis, and died of infection. It's what most scholars kind of believe, or at least some things that I read pointed in that direction. So this Antiochus Epiphanes was not defeated in battle. He died of a horrible, painful sickness and death, most likely gangrene, sepsis, and then died of a severe fever. Verse 26, and the vision of the evening and the morning, which was told, is true. Wherefore shut thou up the vision, for it shall be for many days. And I, Daniel, fainted and was sick certain days. Afterward I arose up and did the king's business. And I was astonished at the vision, but none understood it. So Gabriel revealed to Daniel what this means. Now here in this picture, we have the four divisions of the Greek Empire: Thrace, Syria, Egypt, and Macedonia. Coming up out of this Syria area was Antiochus Epiphanes, and the danger that he would pose to the children of Israel. Now, coming up out of this area, they have put Rome here. But I want to point you to Antiochus Epiphanes as this little horn, and guide you in that direction, because once this leopard, once this sheep is destroyed, we have a future event coming. Now, Rome would come up out of these empires and would take all of the Mediterranean Sea area, the Mediterranean Sea, the Black Sea, out in the Atlantic, all the way up to Great Britain. Would be conquered by the Roman Empire. And as we look at that last horn, not the one in this vision of Daniel, but as we look toward this foreshadowing of a future leader, we see the Antichrist. We see the Antichrist come up out of the Roman Empire, the ruins of the Roman Empire, and more powerful. He will come through peaceful means. He will not come as a evil person. He will be seen as almost Christ-like. And some of the things that Antiochus Epiphanes did in the temple to declare himself to be God, the Antichrist will do as well. So a lot of this that Daniel was seeing is foreshadowing what we're going to read later in the book of Revelation. And when Christ referred to this in Matthew chapter 24, he was implying a future event. He was using a picture that the people could understand. Now I want to go back to the sower who sowed the seeds. As Jesus was telling the sower of the seed parable, there was actually a sower sowing seeds. These Jews knew about Antiochus Epiphanes. They knew about Daniel and Daniel's prophecies. So as he was telling this story, what came to their mind immediately was the abomination of desolation that occurred in Daniel when Antiochus Epiphanes declared himself to be God, set up a statue of himself to Zeus and offered a sacrifice and stopped God's sacrifice. They immediately knew what Jesus was talking about. They immediately knew of the story of Antiochus Epiphanes. They immediately knew who Jesus was talking about. So they would immediately recognize the story and the circumstances, and that would help them see the future of what Jesus was talking about when a leader would yet come on the scene and would do the same things that Antiochus Epiphanes had done, yet to a greater degree and with greater power and skill. So I hope you've enjoyed this chapter. We'll continue our study of the book of Daniel as we go forward. Hope you have a good day.